Imagine you're on a creaking wooden longboat over 1,000 years ago at the height of the Viking Age. You're sailing across the grey North Atlantic. It's freezing cold, there are huge rollers. You're navigating using techniques now long forgotten. You're arriving in a new world to make a new life. You're sitting there as the sails taut in the Atlantic breeze above you. Your family, children, women, the cattle all around you. You have everything you need to establish a new home in a new world. Iceland. Today, I'm sailing in the wake of those Vikings, and you're coming with me. Iceland lies ahead. Let's go and check out the top Viking sites of Iceland.
Before its discovery by the Vikings, Iceland existed in near total isolation at the edge of the North Atlantic. A rugged island shaped by volcanic eruptions and slow-moving glaciers. Yet rumours of its existence endured.
There were persistent rumours in the North Atlantic Scandinavian world, the Viking world, of an island out here to the west. And before it was settled, there are accounts of people arriving here, sometimes by accident, sometimes deliberately. There was Nadador, who was from the Faroe Islands. He was blown off course while fishing, and he reported this strange, seemingly uninhabited island. Another Viking, a man called Floki, he seems to have heard those rumours and those reports, and he decided to actually set out and try and find it for himself. He came here, he may have landed on somewhere near this, and he climbed a mountain, and it said that as he looked inland, all he saw was snow and ice. And it's him that first gave it the name Iceland. So even before settlers came here with their livestock and their cattle and their families, there were these reports, no doubt rumours, no doubt tall stories about a place untouched by humans, a land of ice and fire.
Over the 9th and 10th centuries, as many as 60,000 Vikings are estimated to have made their home right here in Iceland.
So why did the Vikings come here? Well, I think actually there are some interesting similarities to other settler colonial movements. They were escaping trouble at home, or they were escaping something at home. Perhaps it was a grasping Norwegian king like Harald Fairhair that was demanding taxes and obedience from his subjects in Norway. Perhaps they were just adventurous spirits. They wanted to live in a different way. They wanted to stake out a piece of ground that perhaps they couldn't in Norway because of overpopulation or because they were the second son, something like that. We know from the archaeological finds that some of them may have served their apprenticeship. They had gone a Viking, they'd raided, they'd pillaged, they'd captured, made a bit of money for themselves. They were looking for a new kind of life. Perhaps they wanted to go back to farming, to raise a family. This seemed like a more peaceful place than Yorkshire or outside Dublin. There was also the pull factor. There were raw materials here. There were walrus tusks. There's great fishing. There's land. In this landscape, I think the future was more of a blank canvas than it was back in Scandinavia or British and Irish Isles. You could seize the future that you wanted.
Before its discovery by the Vikings, Iceland existed in near total isolation at the edge of the North Atlantic. A rugged island shaped by volcanic eruptions and slow-moving glaciers. Yet rumours of its existence endured. Reykjavik, meaning smoky bay, most likely named after the steam arising from the geothermal activity.
So the story you get from the sagas is that Ingolf Arnason really is the first settler. He puts down a community pretty much on this spot in Reykjavik in around 874. And this is what's so exciting about the excavations that's gone on beneath the city street today. We've got this longhouse here. You can see these huge paving stones leading up to that door, a big turf wall that would have gone up, the roof supported by big posts of oak imported probably from Europe, and a big hearth in the middle of fire. a chieftain's hut, perhaps even the Anderson family themselves. But what's so fascinating is that archaeologists have discovered a complicating factor, which is what archaeologists do, and that's why they add so much to the historical record. If you come over here, you can see a structure which appears, or does date from before 874, and we know that because of this material here. Do you see this lighter covered dust almost? Well, this is volcanic debris, this volcanic matter. And what's great about Iceland is there's a real rhythm to life and settlement here, which is occasionally you get these enormous volcanic eruptions, and they leave a layer of ash. And each of those layers of ash have different chemical signatures, so you know which volcano they've come from. This one, we know, was around 871, give or take a year or two. And we now think, thanks to this detective work by archaeologists and this volcanic matter here, that this really is perhaps decades before Arneson arrives, which means that the settlement of Iceland might not have been quite as clear-cut. And you do get a sense of that from the sagas too, so they're not in disagreement. But it seems that people could have been coming here for perhaps centuries. They might have come here for summers. They might have come hunting walrus, looking for a place to settle. But then they would often head back to Scandinavia before the onset of winter. And so this area was known about. It would have been rekied. Reports would have reached Norse Viking people in Scandinavia, but also in Britain and Ireland. People might have come for a summer and then gone home. They might have stayed for a winter or two. And it was that 874 date is probably the arrival of full-time settlers. They would have brought livestock with them. They would have brought women and children of a community. They'd have settled down. They'd have started mining in the bogs for iron. They'd have started working in blacksmith shops. They started pulling together all the different threads you need to build a sustainable, permanent settlement.
From that first settlement, Norse communities began to push inland, spreading across Iceland's wide, untouched grasslands, carving out farms and building new homes in an unforgiving landscape. To get a better understanding of what daily life was really like for these first settlers, I'm leaving Reykjavik behind and heading to a reconstruction of a Viking Longhouse, a place where Iceland's story truly began.
Just look at this. A legendary Viking Longhouse, very carefully reconstructed, based on the archaeology they found in this valley. And this is how they survived in this very hostile environment. And look at, first thing you notice, these big, thick turf walls. Now this isn't mud, it's turf. It's this section of soil right at the top of the soil, just beneath the grass. It's full of roots and full of air, so it's perfect for insulation. This is 1 metre thick on this wall. You can see stone foundation at the bottom there, so solid foundation, but this needs to be replaced, this turf, once every 10, 15 years. And then roof up here, turf on the roof as well, so you've got this wonderful grass growing. And this is what you need, really, to protect yourself against these savage Icelandic winters. Not just the winter, I'm here in September and it is absolutely freezing. With the wind chill, it's below zero. These buildings kept these communities safe in these conditions. Turf, stone, around a wooden frame. Inside there is wood, but big bits of wood were in short supply in Iceland. As you can see, not many trees around, and the Vikings were actually responsible for chopping down the trees that were here in their first couple of 100 years of settlement of Iceland. And so they had to make do with driftwood that washed up on the shores, with wood that was imported from Norway. Wood was very precious. When you moved house, you up sticks and leave. You take all the wood with you and you go and build somewhere else. So let's get inside now, get out of this wind, through this lovely wooden door frame. Nice door, wow, yeah. You get a sense, 1 metre of turf and you're in. Woo, it's warm. What a difference. I mean, it must be 20 degrees warmer in here and you're suddenly out of that howling wind, completely protected. First thing you notice is the hearth. This would have been so important. A big hearth. They would have cooked on this hearth. It was the only light really in the room. There was a little bit of a chimney, but the hearth is, the fire is responsible for much of the light. No windows. And then also this is where people would have gathered around for warmth and stories and hanging out and doing their chores. So this is the owner's bed. You can see these lovely carvings to denote that status. Quite short because they'd have sat up in bed. in that medieval period, so you wouldn't have needed to stretch out and lie down, which is good. And then simpler beds on this side of the room. And it seems like master, children, relatives, but also servants, perhaps even slaves, would have all slept in this room. I think there was something about this climate that meant they didn't have the luxury of radically different living conditions and treating people very differently. There was a communal nature to it. Slaves would have been very, very valuable indeed. They'd have been essential to help run the farm and to help make things. And they would also have been, in the winter, a good source of heat. The more bodies in here, the better. It would have been very cozy. You got to know each other very well indeed. Nothing like the privacy that we recognise today, we hanker after today. And then right in the back here, you have a very important room, a partition here with a lock on it, and only one person had the key to that lock. That would be the woman of the house, the responsible, the organised person, because in here is the pantry. So especially this time of year, September, you are laying in the supplies, all of the things that you've gathered, all the berries that you're drying and turning into jams, the lamb that you've salted, that's all going into this area here. You've got beer there that you've made from the barley. That was one of the crops that you could grow in Iceland. You've got the skyr, the famous Icelandic skyr, which is thick, yogurt-like, high in protein, yogurt-like substance, which can keep you going through the winter as well. So that would have been absolutely packed this time of year. It would have felt very satisfying getting that whole room ready for the winter, knowing that your chance of survival absolutely depended on those supplies lasting through the months of darkness. And then you've got all the other, all the other activities of Viking life, of Icelandic life. You have got you're spinning, you're using that wool from the sheep. You're brushing it out. You're brushing the wool until it is threads that you can then spin together, create yarn, and eventually woolen garments. Again, essential for keeping you alive. You've got to wear a lot of wool in this climate. So spinning, making wool, that was actually an export. That was a valuable export of Iceland. That was controlled by women. So women very powerful in the society. They were the breadwinners in that respect. They could bring in much needed extra income. As for the men, well, the men had their various uses, but one of the more famous Viking male pursuits was raiding. And that would involve months, perhaps years away, raiding other settlements elsewhere in the North Atlantic world, and exploring. First Iceland, then Greenland, then Vinland into North America. And it all happened because of the intrepid, hardy, tough, resilient men and women who lived in places like this.
From these scattered communities, wider networks began to take shape, slowly evolving into a shared system of law and governance. Disputes had to be settled, grievances aired, and laws agreed. And for centuries, there was only one place to do it. Each year, people from across Iceland gathered here at Thingvellir, the site of the ancient open-air parliament, where the business of an emerging nation was conducted beneath the open sky.
This is one of the most important places in Iceland, if not the most important place, because this is a site well situated, just inland from Reykjavik, equidistant between the main powerful families of Iceland as it was being settled in that early era of settlement. And this is a place where once a year, at the height of summer, all of those great lords would come with their retinues. It was ideal. There was pasture for horses. There were birch forests for firewood. There's a huge lake down there with brown trout, a river running through it for fresh water. And this landscape was suddenly transformed for a couple of weeks every single year into a city, a town really, the only town in Iceland. People from all of these outlying areas would come together. And you can still see evidence of that because this is Iceland. It's cold, even at the height of summer, potentially. It's windy. And so they wouldn't just set up tents. They actually had permanent foundations, and you can see some of them around me now. You can see these stone foundations. They would bring turf, they would bring their own wood, they would bring canvas or blankets and create these sort of, hardened tents. Then the lords would live there with their retinues, with their families. They would gather, they would do business, they would exchange sons and daughters on the marriage market. But most importantly, they were gathering for politics. How to rule Iceland, how to get along, how to resolve disputes that arise between them. They were here for a parliament, and that meets over there. One of the reasons that they chose to come here, all the natural features I mentioned, but also there's something very special about this place. There is something about this landscape, it is awe-inspiring. They chose, little did they know, but they chose the place where the North American plate meets what will become the Eurasian plate. So this isn't just a meeting place of men, it turns out it's a meeting place of the Earth's crust itself. How perfect is that? We've just come up the river a little bit from that camping area, and now we are here at the heart of this Icelandic project, really. Look at that, this huge natural amphitheatre. This was the Law Rock. And this is where every single free Icelandic man, so not the women, not the enslaved people, but the free Icelandic men could come here and they would stay down here in the amphitheatre. They perhaps were in the gorge beyond as well, but they would listen to the law speaker, and he would stand up there and he would recite the laws as they'd been agreed so that everyone in the country knew the laws under which they lived. Now, those laws were decided by a sort of assembly of the nobles. It was a couple of hundred people. There were the great lords of Iceland and a couple of advisors, and they met just over here as well. And they would all agree on a consensus. They'd agree on laws. Those laws were then given at this place. But normal people could have their say. They could speak up, they could ask for redress, they could talk about things that they were suffering from, injustice. They could also bring disputes here, and those disputes would be decided in this 2-week period around midsummer. So this is seen really as the world's oldest national assembly, the world's oldest parliament. It's an enormous Icelandic contribution to the march of global democracy.
Iceland's contribution to the development of democracy is truly unique, and it's something Icelanders today are fiercely proud of. But there's something else they take just as much pride in: their hot springs.
Iceland is world famous for its hot springs. They are everywhere as you look around the landscape. You see these plumes of steam coming up from little fissures in the rock, little geysers all over this island. But I'm heading to a place now where there's a particularly thick concentration. And even though it's pretty near freezing point, I think I might go in for a little swim, have a little hot tub. Nature's hot tub. These geothermal springs are unbelievable. Never been anywhere like it. Oh, this is perfection. Best thing I've ever done. It is freezing up there. It's like a hot bath here. Oh. That was an experience like no other I've ever had. It's pretty cold up here. It's actually about zero, particularly with the wind chill. And yet, there's a bathtub running through the middle of this valley. No wonder the Vikings wanted to move here. First of all, the climate was a bit warmer than it is today. There was agricultural land. There was no one to compete with. They were safe from human enemies. There was an abundance of fish in the streams. And here, at regular intervals, free, superheated water to warm their houses and warm their bones in the middle of winter. I think I'd have emigrated here. Beats Yorkshire.
Having dried off and got back into my clothes, I'm heading to the National Museum of Iceland. Here, an extraordinary collection of Viking-era artefacts brings that world vividly to life. From everyday objects and coins to finely crafted weapons. For anyone with an interest in Viking history, this is an absolute must-see.
I've come to the National Museum of Iceland here in Reykjavik, and it's very, very exciting because as a kid growing up in the UK, you hear a lot about something called Danegeld, and that is silver, that is money, tons of silver in some cases, paid by the English as protection money to get the Vikings to leave them alone. And particularly around the 990s, things got really bad. The Danes start invading England. They fight at Battle of Malden in 991. There's a heroic defeat that an English force suffers there. And King Ethelred the Unready makes the decision to just pay the Vikings, leave them alone. Of course, it doesn't really work out. The Vikings come back in the mid-990s and threaten London. They get paid again. And what's so exciting is I've always heard that story told from the British point of view, the English point of view, the paying of that money. Here in Iceland, we see the other side of that equation. Here is the money that was taken by those Viking Age warriors, and it was, in this case, brought to Iceland. So we can imagine someone taking part, perhaps even in the Battle of Malden, imagine that, perhaps in the later assaults, the 990s. This is a coin hoard, hundreds of coins, found dating from the end of the 10th century, we think, and it was obviously brought here, we can imagine, by a settler, by a veteran of that Viking force. Perhaps then he came with his family to make a new life, to settle in Iceland. His marauding days were behind him. Perhaps he's getting old, his back's playing up a bit, and he arrives in Iceland to make a new life, to settle, buries his coins, and for some reason forgets to dig them up or whatever reason. But that is wonderful. It's just some of the extraordinary objects from the settlement period, what we call the Viking Age. You've got Viking Age weaponry, arrowheads, axe heads, and look at these are extraordinary. These swords here, what I love about these swords is the pommels are very typical of the Viking Age. I've seen pommels like that, some of them, I dug up one like that in a field in Yorkshire, part of this Viking world that stretches from way over in Eastern Europe right the way across to Iceland and beyond about 1,000 years ago. So you've got these swords here, very high status, prized weapons, perhaps sort of family heirlooms passed down. And then we've got axe heads. We've got some spears here. We've got a shield boss. Apparently in Iceland, they find a lot more axes because axes could be used by normal people, chopping wood and various tasks around the farm as well. So multi-purpose, but those swords are wonderful. And you've got the silver wire wrapped around the grip of that one. Extraordinary. And people think of the Viking era as a time of violence and chaos and marauding. And I think historians and archaeologists have really questioned that and pointed out that sometimes the archaeological evidence isn't really there for that. So constant crazy violence and conflict. And in Iceland, certainly there's no evidence of these great big battles and the kind of drama we see in the sagas. But they do have this one set of human remains here at the museum, which does show catastrophic, violent death. Now, this could have been just people falling out, a drunken brawl, a jealous husband, an angry neighbour arguing about a farm line of demarcation. But we do see here on this side of the skull an absolutely massive blow to the side of the head from an axe, and also another blow here. If you look at he shaved a piece off the back of the head where another axe blow has fallen, and this person was then buried in the family plot. So evidence of crazy, hyper-violent Vikings, warriors going at each other, or just evidence of the kind of everyday disputes that will arise when us humans live in close proximity to each other.
My time in Iceland is nearly at an end, but there's just enough left for one last journey to watch the sun set on this remarkable landscape.
I've never been anywhere quite like Iceland. And if you love Viking history, this is definitely the place to come. There are extraordinary Viking sites that help us reach beyond the popular myth of the Vikings. Yes, these were warriors. Yes, these were wonderful sailors and raiders. But these were also people who carved out an entirely new society on this previously unexplored island. And they didn't just build those farms and then villages, towns and cities. Alongside that, they built a culture, one of the most exciting and colourful anywhere in the world. Stories of Norse gods, the sagas. And the place to really learn about that is in Iceland itself, where people are still so attached to those stories and that tradition. And they appear so rooted in this landscape. It feels natural. Hi there, I'm Dan Snow, and if you love history, you know that History Hit is on a mission to bring the past to life. Every week, we travel the world to film original and in-depth documentaries. And now History Hit has launched a YouTube membership to give you access to even more films released weekly. You heard it here first, folks. Join now to make sure you never miss out on exclusive documentaries on topics like newly discovered shipwrecks or the clash of gladiators. We cover all periods, from Pompeii to D-Day. Click the join button below this video and see for yourself what History Hit has to offer. We can't wait to have you join the team.